Thank you so much, Lori, and good morning, everybody. I was hoping that we could actually start with some introductions. So I'm wondering if let me stop that share for a second. If everybody would mind doing introductions. So I'm looking at names and I'm wondering if I can just do a quick call off. So good morning, Denise. Can you introduce yourself and let me know where you're from and how long you've been in your position?
Good morning. So my name is Denise Yaw. I'm acting executive CEO for an organization called CARES Advocates for Families. I've been involved with CARES. I'm one of the founding members of CARES. So we've been around for about 12 years. So I've been primarily the board president, and I'm in the position because of a loss we had of trying to situate ourselves to have a board that functions well. So I'm really happy to be here.
Well, thank you. Welcome. Megan, good morning.
Good morning. Hi, I'm Megan Martin. I am the grants manager at Children's Home of Wyoming Conference in Binghamton and the Southern Tier Community Center located in Endicott. And I've been in my position for about 4 years now.
Great, thank you. All right. Hi, Jesse. Do we want to introduce yourself for everybody? You're muted, Jesse.
You would think I've never experienced Zoom after all this time. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Jessie Stonehey. I'm the Executive Director of Action for Older Persons, and I've been here about 2.5 years.
Thank you. Lonnie.
Hi, good morning. I am brand new in my position at the Food and Health Network and Rural Health Network. I'm the program assistant here as of AmeriCorps Vista, and I'm also interning with Get There in transportation, mobility management, and equity. I just moved up from New Orleans back to Broome County last week, but I'm also getting my PhD in organizational leadership currently.
Wow, well, welcome and welcome home.
Thank you.
Jill?
Hi, I'm Jill Lloyd, pronoun she, her, and I am the Executive Director for Samaritan Counseling Center of the Southern Tier in Endwell, New York.
Thank you, Jill. How long have you been in your position?
Marion Powers actually retired in February, so since March 1st, I've been the acting executive director. So.
Okay, thanks. All right, my screen just jumped around, so I'm hoping I'm not going to miss anybody. Amy?
Good morning. I am the outreach coordinator for the First Presbyterian Church of Johnson City This Day program. I have been in this position for about 1.5 years.
Thank you. And Stephen, good morning.
Morning, Sharon. My name is Stephen Mushak. I'm with Triple Cities Makerspace. I helped to found the organization 10 years ago this past August, and I have been in the executive director position since 2020.
Yes, sir. Okay, Mel.
Hi, I'm Melissa Weber. I am the secretary of the board of directors at the Fenton Free Library, and I've been in that position for about 3 years.
Okay, thank you. Greg?
My name is Greg Wilt. I am a grant writer for the Children's Home of Wyoming Conference and the Southern Tier Community Center. I've been in my position for about 4 or so months. I work with Megan.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, we got you, Jill. Emma, I see you here. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. I am the Assistant Director of Community Health at the Rural Health Network of South Central New York. I've been in that position about 1 year, and I'm also a board member of the Ithaca Free Clinic since 2021.
Thank you. Kat.
Hi, I'm Kat. I'm an AmeriCorps Vista for the Rural Health Network with the Produce Prescription Program.
Thank you. Good morning. Let's see. Alexis.
Hi, I am Alexis Sorbello. I work for HCA. I have been in my position for 9 months now. I am marketing and development.
Thank you. Let's see. Taylor. Um,
Can you hear me?
good morning, Taylor. Yes, now we can.
Okay, sorry, I'm driving, so I can't throw my video on. But I'm Taylor Clark, and I am a senior accountant with a CPA firm in Buffalo called Brock, Schechter, and Polikoff. I work remotely. I started a year ago there. I'm also a new board member on the United Way. Previously, I was involved with ELS through the United Way, as well as I worked for a private company as their accountant. And prior to that, I was at another CPA firm.
Thank you. Drive safely.
Thank you.
Bryce.
Oh, hi, I'm in a similar situation as Taylor. I don't have my video on, I apologize for that. I'm Bryce Reynolds. I am the treasurer for both the Triple Cities Makerspace and Safe Streets, which is the fiscal sponsor of the NOMA Community Center.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, and Captain Joe.
Hi, Captain Joseph Hansen, Salvation Army in Binghamton. I've been here for 4 years as the Corps officer.
Thank you. Nicole.
Hi, I'm Nicole Barron, Executive Director of Rise New York. I've been here for 6 years.
I'm sorry, did you say 6 years?
6 years.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Matt.
I am Matt Lewis with the Binghamton Police Department, and I am also the president of the Police Athletic League of Binghamton, and I've been in that position for 3 years now.
All righty, thank you. Let's see. Is it Mika?
Micah.
Micah, thank you. Did Micah drop off? Oh,
No,
there you are.
he's there.
Trying to get it all together here. Good morning, Micah Barrero, new board member with the United Way and chair of the health committee for the NAACP Broome, Tioga.
Welcome. And I think, let's see, Kim.
Hi, I'm Kim Robinson. I'm the Executive Director with the Johnson City Senior Center, and I've been here 4.5 years.
Wonderful, thank you. Is there anybody that I missed?
I hopped on a little late. I can jump in.
Oh, Erin,
I'm Erin
okay, I'm sorry.
Summerly. That's okay. I'm also with the Rural Health Network of South Central New York. I'm the director of our Food and Health Network. I think I've been here maybe close to 10 years now. But I am on the board for a few nonprofits, one Food Bank of the Southern Tier, and then also CADE, the Center for Agricultural Development and Entrepreneurship.
All right. And is there anybody else that I might have missed? Great. So again, thank you. And I'd like to thank Tim and Paula for inviting me to attend today or to provide a little bit of my own information. I have some slides. You are welcome to the slides. Tim has those. He can send them out to anyone afterwards who is interested in having those. And I'm just going to probably go through them fairly quickly. More of these are just sort of thought stimulants, and then I'm really encouraging you to ask me questions at any time. Paula and Tim, if you can help with either if a question goes in the chat or if someone is sort of raising their hand. So as Paula, introduced me, I have had both a long experience as my executive director at Mothers and Babies, but I've also been on a number of boards, and and I've been on different types of boards, again, as Paula mentioned, both at the national level, some at the state level, and then a number of them at the local level. And they have been for all sorts of different organizations. So I certainly have had some experiences in both perspectives. And because of some of those experiences, particularly being on a board, is why I've always had such a strong interest in making sure that everyone really understands what the function of the board is, why it's important, and then that relationship between particularly the executive director and the board of directors. So in responding to the request from Paula about presenting today, the goal here is really to assist everyone in understanding what that board development and engagement and roles are, expectations all about. So first and foremost, it is critical to know that a nonprofit is only as successful as its board of directors. Again, having been an ED for 31 years, we know how much it takes to run an organization. And for those of you who aren't necessarily in that, director role, all of the key administrative, people underneath you and your program people are critical, but you really do have to have an effective board in order to ensure that the organization is successful. And in my experiences, I've actually seen where boards or organizations have failed because of the lack of the let's say interest and or knowledge at the board of directors level. At one point, I was on the board of a child care center, and while many of the board members were extremely well-meaning, most of them were parents of children who went to the daycare center. Very little board experience, and it doesn't mean that someone who doesn't have board experience can't become a board member. What it really means is it puts a responsibility on whether it's the leadership of the organization to help really inform them about the expectations and of the both the expectations of the organization as well as what is legally required for an entity. In a similar situation, being a part of the National Perinatal Association for many years, we had a division of the National Perinatal Association where state perinatal associations were members. And again, during my tenure there, we saw a number of the state perinatal associations that actually lost their incorporated status or their nonprofit status, through an IRS ruling because of a failure to attend to, some of the legal and fiduciary responsibilities they have. And once again, that falls on it's a shared responsibility between the leadership of the organization and the board of directors. So those are really critical pieces. Excuse me, I'm trying to get over a little bit of a cold. So this is just a very simple one. Again, definition. The board of directors is a governing body of an organization. And it depends on what type of organization it is, whether the board members are elected by the board of directors, the body itself, or if it is a membership organization where you need to take it out to your entire membership for an election of board members and officers and bylaw changes and things like that. So as I mentioned, with the National Perinatal Association, we have an association of perinatal networks and the New York State Perinatal Association. Those are membership organizations. A membership organization is required by law, one, to have an annual meeting, and two, that all of their members get to vote on the members for the board of directors. So there are two different sort of models for boards of directors. What's absolutely essential is that every single incorporated nonprofit must have a board of directors. And I think that Denise, you were just mentioning that you are you were one of the founders of CARES Advocates and now acting director. That's a very different model as you're beginning to grow the organization. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. But key is that your articles of incorporation, which again, if you are not relatively a part of the beginning of the organization, you may not have ever seen the articles of incorporation. But clearly, at least all executive directors and ideally most of the administrative staff of an agency should be very familiar with the bylaws. The bylaws are really where it drives the composition of the board. It talks about the terms of the boards, how board members are elected, what are the expectations with respect to attendance or their voting, conflicts of interest, the expectation for meetings, and all of those things. So those two documents are extremely important to every organization. And if you are not familiar with those, you absolutely would want to review those, particularly when it comes to your board functioning. And I would also say that for all of us who are any of the nonprofits, as we have an external audit on an annual basis, it is usually the part of the auditor's function is to also ensure that your board has actually met according to the schedule laid out in the bylaws, as well as that all minutes are recorded. And so, it's very, the auditors themselves will often ask for a copy of those bylaws, just to make sure that what they're seeing in the records matches with that. So one question is always, what does your board look like? Is your board what I call a program board, or is it a business board? Over the years, I have sat on a number of boards of local nonprofits where they have invited their partners, organizations that work with them, help to share in programming, that become members of those boards. And that's fine. It really helps to develop the program pieces for the organization. But sometimes when you're going to look at the functions that a board really needs to address, some of the understanding of their both legal and fiduciary responsibility, they may not necessarily believe that that's critical, or not necessarily understand that it's critical, because they're really there because of their shared interest in the program that's being offered by the entity. Secondly, oftentimes when you have board members who are actually representatives of partner organizations, therefore more of a program board, they may not have the same affinity for your mission. I mean, clearly they do, because you're sharing a program, but they may not recognize that it's their responsibility as a board member to do everything they can to ensure the sustainability and the effectiveness of your organization. And when it comes to personal financial commitment or to fundraising, because they may be needing to do that same function in their own organization, it may be problematic, or they may not be as willing to be invested in it. So those are these things that I have seen come up when the composition of a board is really more program focused as opposed to business focused. And when we look at the business focus, again, it's a matter of who you're recruiting and what you need them for. So I think it's always important, to ask this question. Key responsibilities for your board members: they are fiduciaries. They must act in the best interest of the nonprofit organization. And again, people need to understand that these are legal responsibilities. No one should take on the responsibility as a board member for an organization without understanding the potentially personal liability that they have. And that is really important. When you look at the responsibilities here, and as the second one shows, guiding for the sustainable future, but through management, I want to make sure to say that management does not mean that a board member should be working or directing the work of your employees, trying to direct the work of your organization. They're really there to help guide the philosophy of it, and perhaps make recommendations, but they are not there for the day-to-day management of it. That is clearly the role of the CEO or the executive director. And I would say that particularly for, and again, keep in mind that 99% of all organizations, the board of directors recruits, hires, evaluates, and works directly and evaluates the work of the executive director. The board is the boss for the CEO or the executive director. So, over the years, I've often said, well, I have 20 people who are my boss. My staff had one person who was their boss. But keep in mind that that board is your boss. And I have seen times when, a couple of board members may be very unhappy with what's happening with an organization, and they can actually really derail, an executive director or some of the work of the ED, if they really push through with with other members of the board. A key bottom is that the board's job collectively is to do everything it can to advance the mission of that organization. I'm so apologizing. If you have not looked at the New York State Attorney General's website, they have some great information and resources for boards of directors, and they do speak to this three duties: the duty of care, loyalty, and obedience. And so I would encourage you to take a look at that if you have not seen that before. And this is actually something, they used to produce a little booklet, and I would actually provide this to all of our new board members every year. it was really a good benefit to help orient them to what the expectations are of a board of directors. So I think that when we get into board development and recruitment is one of the things I think, Paula, that we wanted to really talk a little bit about today. And again, we want to think about, whether that board is a formative board where you're just beginning to start an organization, or if it's an established board. You'll read a lot about when you are just beginning to form an organization, what are the challenges that you have? And Denise, how many people do you have working with you right now as employees?
Employees, just 2.
Okay, so a very small, very fledgling organization, which puts a lot of work on your shoulders, but also that means that when you're looking at your board, you may need to specifically recruit people who can help address some of the gaps that you may have in staff. Clearly on most boards, we're always looking for, an attorney. We might be looking for an accountant because those are typically positions or expertise that we don't hire in a lot of our organizations unless we're a very large organization. But when it comes to a small fledgling organization, and I know, for example, Stephen went through this as well, you're going to look for people who have expertise in some function to help grow the program aspect of your organization as well. So, beginning to look at a formative board, is really essential to make sure that you're getting both the very diverse perspectives and experiences, but you might want to look for someone, who has some expertise that you can't afford to hire as a staff person. So for example, maybe somebody can come and help develop a website. Maybe that's a board position you want to recruit, or somebody who is expert in marketing, who can help get the word out about your program or mission. With an established board, it's really important to look at, again, both your diversity on the board as well as where are your areas of expertise, that you need or that you want. And when we're looking to recruit new members for boards of directors, there are resources out in the community that we can tap into. But oftentimes it's very important to look at who are the people that are in your current board members' networks that can bring you some of the expertise or representation of various elements that you're looking for. It's also key to oftentimes look at who's been volunteering for you in what capacity. If they've been volunteering for you, they've already demonstrated a real strong interest in your mission. And so they may actually end up being a very good board member for you. And of course, as we've talked, even with even a program board, a lot of times we may want to look at partners. So, we'll come back, we'll talk about some of these things, as you have questions, and I'll just move through the rest of these. When we're recruiting, it's not just a matter, and let me back up, as we talk about oftentimes established boards, we're out looking for board members who can really help us and to help drive the mission and further the sustainability of the organization. And then there are individuals, as an organization matures, people want to be on certain boards. It's very prestigious for an individual to be on a board. It can be advantageous for them in their own employed position to be on a board as they put that on their CV or their resume. So we need to make sure that a potential board member first is prepared to accept the legal and fiduciary responsibilities that come with serving as a board member. And then again, those are very specific under laws for the federal government, predominantly through the IRS and in the state that we're operating in. And of course, for all of us operating in New York State is very, very specific, with what are the expectations of a nonprofit organization. And if you have not heard of it, it's about 8 years old now, but in 2015, the New York State Legislature actually passed the Nonprofit Revitalization Act, which really put a great deal of more onus and responsibility on boards and the organizations in order to ensure that they can maintain their nonprofit status in New York State. So it's very important when recruiting people to help them understand what is the vision for the organization and that they share that passion for your mission or your cause. And whether it is your governance team, your recruitment and nominating team, part of the role to some degree of other people within the organization, to make sure that a person who is nominated, as a potential candidate, brings some value to the team, meaning the board of directors team, so that they can really, really help further the organization. And the individual really should be willing to commit to helping the board, the agency, in sort of all aspects. That doesn't mean every board member needs to know everything about your organization. It simply means that, they may have one area of expertise that they can help in perhaps one or more functions for the board of directors itself. A big piece that everybody talks about is fundraising. And Leading with Intent is another great resource that you might want to tap into as you're looking about information for your organization. But while fundraising, oftentimes people think that fundraising is why we bring people on the board. I have found in my experience that most board members are not excited and very intimidated, and oftentimes don't want to join a board if the expectation is fundraising. One of the key pieces. So it does continue to be one of the challenges in recruiting board members as to what you expect about fundraising. So I like to ask the question of whose responsibility is it? When we first started at Mothers and Babies, we were starting with grant funding from New York State. Our program was developed and run 100% by the amount of funding that we got from the state. So in those early years, we didn't need board members to do fundraising. We operated on the grants that we received. As our organization grew and the funding was flat from the state for 5 and even 10 years in a couple of our programs, the request of clients who wanted to be served by our organization grew and grew, and we needed to grow the programs, but the funding from the state was not growing equally. So we did need to begin fundraising. And I do recall that when we first approached the board with the expectation of helping to raise funds by either one, personally contributing, or secondly, making an ask of someone, we actually had board members resign. I'll never forget a phenomenal board member, and he was a great partner, totally believed in our mission, was willing to do lots, but he refused to make any personal financial contribution. So when you are an organization that relies on contributed income, board members really are expected. And the first and foremost, they are expected to make an individual donation to the organization. And while there are some boards that would set a minimum in the model of a give or get, some people might say we want every board member to either give personally or get, let's say, $500. So if they, let's say, could contribute, $50 or $100 on their own, we'd expect them to go out and get other people to donate that other $400. Give or get is tough. I've always felt that what's really important is to ask a board member to make a contribution to the organization that is personally significant to them. We don't necessarily know, and it's not our business to know, what are the personal resources of our board members. So we're relying on them to make a gift that's meaningful to them. And that's really the terminology that you want to use when you're encouraging those gifts. And we all know that, when we can say to a funder that 100% of our board has made personal contributions, it often goes a long way in helping us to secure the grant funds that we might be soliciting from that foundation. So, and over and above making those individual gifts, we want our board members to build awareness of our organization. And so introducing us as the organization to their network of colleagues and friends and family, or bringing their entities who might have an interest in us to our organization, again, potentially as a new board member. And of course, if your organization is doing any type of an event, then we are really expecting our board members to fully participate in that, perhaps not necessarily 100% in the planning of it, that may be a small group, but clearly that we'd want them to attend the events and to bring other guests to the event to help build, that attendance there. Many organizations, do have a fundraising committee or a development committee. Again, in my experience with Mothers and Babies, we went for probably at least 15 years before we actually created a formal fund development committee. And, we did have at one point an ad hoc event committee when we tried, a various event, a golf tournament. We did a concert for a few years, and now our signature event is our fashion gala. Those all have dedicated committees now, but initially beginning with a fund development or resource development committee. And we changed from fund development to resource because it's not just raising the money. It may be, are there other entities that can provide other types of resources for us? Donations, for example, to our clothing closet, or, helping us to secure the silent auction, baskets that would come, for the event, things like that. So resource development is really where we focus the terminology for the committee on now. The other reality is that fundraising really is a shared responsibility. I always looked at this very, very carefully because, again, having grown an organization that relied very heavily on state grant funds, the state contracts typically will say that your staff cannot participate in fundraising. They should be 100% focused on the grant through which they are paid. So for the most part, the staff that would be involved in this would oftentimes be your administrative staff or staff who are hired specifically for a grant writing position or another type of a development position. But staff can actually help draft those annual appeal letters or put together the donor packets. And we can talk about that if you're interested. Donor research is really important. This is really a shared function. This could be a part of a fundraising committee and or something that we take to the full board. And then if a board member is willing to make an ask, we want to make sure that they have all of the materials that they need and the information they need when they're going to meet with an individual to possibly make that ask. And then if in fact that board member chooses to do that meeting, then if the board member wants, then a staff person typically at the administrative level should attend that meeting as well to help fill in any of the questions. And I have found it over the years very beneficial that necessarily a board member didn't want to make an ask, but they were more than willing to set up an appointment for me to meet with the leadership of, let's say, a large corporation so that I could explain what all we did and then make the, open the door and help begin to solicit their interest in ideally a donation for our organization or some part of our programming.
Sharon, we have a question in chat.
Sure.
What is your opinion on how the cash donation requirement affects diversity with regards to having board members who are from lower rungs of the socioeconomic ladder?
There is still nothing wrong with making an ask. Keep in mind that theory of what is of personal significance. If someone has very little personal income, perhaps they're not able to work, they may have young children, they're again in a lower socioeconomic status, they're retired, on limited incomes. If a board member provides a $5 donation because that's what they can afford, then that is their contribution. Individual contributions by board members are personal, and that's not information that needs to be shared among the entire board. Over the years, as I would report out to the board, we would say we have, 80% or, 15 out of 20 board members have made a personal contribution. Never have we said, Jane donated $100, Rich donated $1,000. We never called people out for their donation. So even someone with very few resources could give, even if it's, like I said, as little as $5 or even $1, whatever that case may be. It's still very possible for that person to be on your board, but to show their personal commitment.
Right. Thanks, Sharon.
So when we're talking about the recruitment and development of new board members, what is the role of the executive director? We do want to be careful that the executive director is not necessarily personally selecting every board member. If you do that, you're oftentimes going to narrow the vision of your board. You need to make sure that, and it's not always healthy that everyone is completely aligned with you philosophically with respect to the how you want to run your organization or what you believe the needs are. It's really important to have those different perspectives. And so The executive director, in my opinion, should absolutely be involved with the recruitment and nominating committee. Or the board may decide that the recruitment and nominating committee, can meet, and the executive director doesn't necessarily need to be involved. But my opinion is that they should have some level of involvement with this. It is really important that I think staff function is to ensure that there are appropriate recruitment materials. I've seen boards where, I might be talking to somebody one day and they go, "Oh, you'd be a great board member for us. Would you like to join our board?" Well, having some of the experiences that I've had, I want to make sure that I know what I'm getting into as a board member. So I would always ask for some information ahead of time. And so that's part of my job, but that's because I'm experienced as a board member. But for someone who is brand new, they may not be aware of what it is. So putting a package together is really important. Is there a job description for your board member? Is there, what sort of an application are you asking them to complete? So you know a little bit more about them. And again, it doesn't matter that they, let's say, don't have a college degree or that they have not had any previous board experience. But again, if they have that passion for the organization, but your materials should also give your expectations. How many board meetings are you going to have per year? How many are they expected to attend? What are their areas of interest? And the expectation often is that they sit on a committee. List your committees. Let them know what the job is that you're asking them to commit to. And that's really what those recruitment materials, that package should be composed of. I also think that it's really important to ensure a very comprehensive board orientation for new members. We have always done this right at the beginning of a year, depending on when you bring your new board members on. Historically, we have always used a calendar year as the term for a board member. So in January each year, we do an orientation for all new board members, but invite former or existing board members to attend if they'd like to. And then pulling together appropriate, lots of materials. Your board members need to know what are the policies of your organization. They absolutely need to know and recognize the responsibilities that are laid out for them in the bylaws. So your board orientation should review those bylaws, other policies, your financial information. Very important for that board. Remember, one of their key things is their fiduciary responsibility. So they should understand if your organization has some financial issues, if you are challenged with raising enough funds to run the programs, if you have debt, or if things are going very well, they should have all of that information. And then it doesn't stop with orientation. It really means that your board members need to have their essential information throughout their entire tenure on the board. At one point in our history, well, at 3 points in our history, a state contract that we had got pulled. It was never because of our mismanagement of a program. At one point, the state decided to turn back some federal money. So every agency that received that federal money lost that funding. That meant, what are we going to do? Are we closing up a program? Do we have to lay off staff? That type of information needs to be shared with the board immediately. It doesn't always have to be waited till a board meeting. It should be shared immediately. When we had cash flow problems and we needed to access a line of credit, there was always a process to say, this has to go out to the board immediately, whether it's the officers of the board or the full board, depending on what the preference of your board is. That communication needs to be there, and it needs to be done on an ongoing basis. And even when it's good news, when we got a state grant in partnership with the Village of Johnson City last year, I saw it on the news at 11 o'clock at night before the village even knew. And at 11 o'clock that night, I sent an email out to my board to let them know that, yay, we were able to get this grant to help us with the move of our agency. So constant communication is really, really essential with your board members. Board members also, while they're committing to you, as you can see here, I have always believed that my board members, that first of all, first and foremost, they are your champions, but they are your highest level volunteer. We may have somebody that's, for example, helps us out with the clothing closet at the Pal Center. We may have somebody who comes in and helps stuff envelopes for us. All of those volunteers are important, but your board members are taking on that legal and fiduciary responsibility for your organization and to help you without any sort of compensation or benefit. So So it's important to also know what goals your board members have for their involvement. Are they doing it because, again, they share the passion for your organization and your mission? And it is appropriate that they might be doing it to learn to expand their own network. They're not only learning about your organization, but they're getting to know and learn about the other individuals on the board, and it may help them to make other connections, which may help them in their own career or in the role in which they have outside of your organization. So it's really essential that the executive director and other administrative staff that the director, assigns to board involvement really fully supports the board members and essentially for the board officers. So I'm going to leave it there, and I would love to open it for discussion. I know, Paula, you had a couple of questions that you wanted to raise.
Yeah, I was trying to go through. You answered some of them. Let me see here. So one that I think, I love this question. Is there anything that you did in your 31 years at the time felt very small as it relates to the board, but in reflection made a big difference in the structure and effectiveness of the board?
That's a tough one. Yeah, it's definitely tough. I think that, again, having had the experience of some poor functioning boards, I wanting to know that our board members are as fully informed as possible. And both with doing that board orientation, making sure they're fully informed at a board meeting or interim in between board meetings. One of the things that I felt most gratified about over the years is oftentimes I'll have a board member come to me and say, I'm on another board and they don't share this information and I'm worried about this. How can I address it, in this other board? Or this organization is doing it this way. And I've learned from us that maybe it should be done this way. So I'm worried about what's my liability on this board. And so, knowing that I have helped many of our board members become better board members for other organizations has really been fairly gratifying. And then I think the other thing that goes very small ways is recognition. Letting board members know when you are electing your board, take the opportunity to announce the new board members. Take the opportunity to recognize a board member, particularly as they are leaving the board. So, we always provide a certificate of appreciation for board members as they're terming off the board. When a board member has been helpful in some particular function, I always try to make sure that we call that out during a board meeting. For our board meetings, part of the package that I prepare is my executive director report. And very often, right at the top of that report, I'll say, I'd like to do a shout out to Danielle. She helped us secure, a grant from, this foundation, or Rich really helped us. He brought in his HVAC people to help us figure out what's wrong with, the heating going on in our building. Or during the pandemic, a board member helped us build the acrylic, barriers so that when we did go back in person, those are the things that, while they're drawing on a resource that they have without necessarily personally doing it, but to give them that recognition during a board meeting goes a long way. I have found that it has resulted in people who are very sad when they have to term off the board and they frequently want to come back on. Or the fact that we have acknowledged them, let's say publicly, is beneficial for them personally and really makes a difference.
Right, great, thank you. One more quick question too, as far as board development and training, professional development. What are some of the things that you used to do around that? Ensuring, like right now, we're trying to find, how can we do some board training and professional development around DEI? What kinds of things did you used to do for that?
So there's a couple of things, and I want to actually jump back. Even I would say we did this in the very beginning of our formation as an organization, but throughout the years we have done it again. One thing we didn't, as I've talked about the legal and fiduciary responsibilities of board members, many people come onto board and don't necessarily understand the gravity of those two terms. But if you've been on a board where there has been some mismanagement or misuse of funds and there's a lawsuit, those board members are going to be named in that lawsuit. So many organizations carry directors and officers liability insurance. Most large organizations carry it. Some smaller organizations carry it. In our early formation as mothers and babies, many board members asked that question. In our early years, we had some people who were medical providers. And so, many of your people with clinical degrees and practices are always worried about being sued. So what is the liability? That comes to mind a lot of times for people when they're on a board of directors as well. So directors and officers liability insurance is often something that someone would ask about. Do you carry this? In our early years, we did not feel there was a need for it. I had to learn more about it myself. We researched the New York State laws around what liability could a board member potentially have, and actually brought an attorney in to discuss, again, help explain the law, and also to discuss the pros and cons of having it in our organization at that period of time. At that point in time in our early years, it was agreed that we did not need it because we were not really doing a lot of direct client services. We needed to bring that back and revisit it 3 times over my history at 30 years there. And we have carried that insurance for a number of years. So providing education to the board on particular topics, sometimes bringing an expert into a board meeting, is a wonderful way to, help address those things. And then, similarly, board members often want to know about your programs. So how do you do that? They can't necessarily come in and shadow your staff for everything, but to have a program component on a board meeting agenda to help them understand one aspect is another way to help really make them, help them learn and grow, and to, again, build, everything, the quality of your board, as well as their ability to make decisions for your organizations. Those are just 2 examples, Paula. The other piece is we brought in, if we've used oftentimes, let's say the accountant that we often have on our board to help understand the financial reports. Most people glaze over when they're looking at your profit and loss statement or your balance sheet. And so they'll rely on the treasurer, to say, okay, here we go with this. But everybody can look at those from a different perspective. But oftentimes board members are afraid to ask about them. So every year or so, I usually ask either a banker or a finance person on the board to do a quick finance 101 at a board meeting, so that people can feel more comfortable in understanding, what that financial report is all about.
Yep, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, we do the program overview on our board meeting as an agenda item. It's called the mission moment.
Yes.
What's happening in the community, and that's been very helpful.
Mm-hmm. One other thing that we have added probably for the last 8 or 9 years at our board meetings has been a good news announcement. So, even though board members have been together for well over a year or more, some may be a little bit newer, we always make sure that we're doing a welcome at the beginning of a board meeting and everyone has a chance to introduce themselves. And again, just remind people sort of, where they're coming from, what their job is, whatever. But, usually by the end of the meeting, we also want to have a good news announcement where we're encouraging board members to share something. So somebody might be, celebrating a new job, or they might be, recently that, a child's engaged or a child is graduating from college. It's one wonderful way to help board members build more of a personal connection, and for you to help know more about your board members. And I think that really builds a lot of camaraderie among the board. So, and I think that's a really important strategy.
Yep, definitely. Does anybody have any questions for Sharon?
Sure, I have one.
Yes, Jessie.
So I have this routine problem, or I don't know if it's a problem. I just, maybe you have some great ideas. You recruit a board member for a specific skill set that they're only the one that has the skill set on the board. And that's great. As an executive director, you really, you probably meet one-on-one with them because it's whatever specific issue. So maybe it's like reevaluating your IT system or something along that line. But they don't really make sense for any of the other committees because they're not really interested, and that's not why you brought them on. I have this experience with a couple of different board members where they don't know where they fit on the board once that expertise is utilized. And then I don't know how to necessarily keep them as engaged or make them feel as ongoing, having that same ongoing value, I guess, from the experience.
So I guess I'm thinking of a couple of things. So as you use the example of a specific skill set, let's say the example of somebody who can help you with your IT. They may be talking in a whole different world, if you will, that many other people don't understand. But if they are there, if they've only come on because you're asking specifically for that task, then maybe that's really not necessarily a board committee role for them, a board member role, but perhaps that's like an ad hoc committee or an advisory role. If they're engaged in the board meeting, so they're interested in being that board member, I'm certain that there's another area that they can belong in. And if you're worried that if your bylaws say that every board member should be a member of a committee, but you're saying there's not really a committee that fits their expertise, they probably have another area of interest. And even if they don't become, let's say, a very active person on that committee, just to encourage them to sit on it, may help to build their interest in it. Are you finding this board member has lost interest because you've been able to take advantage of their...
I've had it in a couple of experiences, and they're usually kind of inherited board members. They're not necessarily someone I recruited, but they've come on the board. Somebody's asked them to come on the board, and usually this is, in my case, it's been usually before. So you talked all about your recruitment materials. So it's like when that period of time that's happened before you, if you're me, where they weren't ever given recruitment materials and someone said, I like this board, and just, they just showed up one day, basically. And they were recruited because nobody knows IT, or that's just an example, or nobody really knows much about marketing. Then you use their expertise and they're already on the board, but they're sitting in meetings going, I don't know what I bring, when someone else might bring this very clear expertise. So I've had them sometimes sit. I do try to put them on a committee that makes most sense. And I've had the sort of twiddling their thumbs and going, I'm not really sure I'm adding value at this point.
Well, I wonder if they really had the understanding or let's say, the passion for the mission, I guess, and maybe that's a frank conversation.
Okay, great.
I just add something. One of the things we do down at NOMA when we bring people on the board, one of the objectives is to kind of like have them learn from each other, so that the board experience is actually an educational and training type of thing as well. So maybe you could take your IT person or your person with a very specific skill set and kind of have them, spread that knowledge out to other board members, and so they can get a little bit more exposure to it and fluent with
an excellent idea,
skill set.
Great, thank you.
Yes, very much so. Because we all can learn a little bit in almost every area. We don't have to become their expert, but to have them sort of showcase what they're doing may help them feel more valued as a board member. Thank you for that suggestion, Bryce.
I have a question.
Yes, Stephen.
In the beginning, you mentioned the national perinatal or some of the national boards that you were on, and they were connected to state organizations, and you said that some of them had lost their status through mistakes they made. So especially early on, that was one of the things that would keep me up at night, that we didn't file some form that nobody knew about as we were learning things. Can you elaborate, maybe without being too specific to the organization? Were these good faith mistakes that the state came down hard on, or how did they end up actually losing their status?
So oftentimes people need to remember that your 990 is critically important. No matter what size of an organization you are, we are all required to file a 990. If you are a very small organization, very small, both fledgling or very small in, revenue, over the course of a year. There's a 990 easy, there's a postcard form, there's a very short sort of like a one-page form, and then there's a very extensive full-blown 990 that every nonprofit has to file. That is critical. And so in this particular instance, the organization neglected to file their 990 for a couple of years. And so two experiences of that. Well, that's where a couple of the state state perinatal associations lost their status, and because there wasn't really anybody either staff-wise or on their board who really knew how to address that situation, they lost their status. The same thing actually happened, and I'm happy to share this about National Perinatal. I was actually president-elect at the time. And at NPA, a lot of the board members were physicians or higher level, nurse managers, things like this. And so their passion, it was in the care that's provided in helping to change healthcare systems and to also improve birth outcomes. It wasn't really in understanding the business process of a nonprofit. And that's the truth. Every nonprofit is a business, and you have to remember that. So the executive director employed, or the agency employed, a outside accounting firm who did their audit each year, and the auditor, of course, prepares the 990. The 990 was done, but it was, for some reason, the executive director failed to file it. This happened, they got a notice from the IRS, and I think if anybody's ever received the notice from the IRS, we're intimidated by those, and you may not really understand them. Well, this simply said, you have failed to file your 990, you must file it or you will face penalties. Those letters got ignored, weren't shared, whether it was via finance committee or with the board, and subsequently the organization was fined $14,000. So when we were sitting at a board meeting one day, I was looking at the finance report. A very, very, very successful, very brilliant physician who was the treasurer at the time, who also had his own outside businesses, was a treasurer. He reported the finance report, and as I looked at it, I see this $14,000 tax bill that was paid. And so I asked the question, why did we pay $14,000 to the IRS? And he couldn't answer it. So we went back, researched with the executive director and their finance person, and realized that they paid the penalty for failing to file the 990 in order to not lose their 501c3 status. Well, the reality is they shouldn't have had to pay it. So I said, let me take care of it. And I simply called the IRS and said, what is this for and why is it and what can we do about it? And all we simply had to do was file the 990, and we ended up getting a rebate on the $14,000 penalty that they had initially assessed on the organization. So in that situation, we avoided the loss of the 501c3 status, but in the state associations, they just weren't astute enough or didn't have someone on the board, who was able to really understand the importance of those filings. And that's also clear now, in the last probably 5 or 6 years, there's a question on the 990 form that says, has this form been provided to all board members? And you really need to make sure that they get that 990. They can choose not to really review or read the whole thing. They need to acknowledge that they've received it and have the opportunity to review it. Sort of a long answer, Stephen, sorry, but that was the key reason.
It was something major. I mean, not filing your taxes is in my mind something major. So it wasn't something trivial that they acted in good faith and then all of a sudden they were come down.
No, but the other thing you need to be careful of is, again, what type of an organization we are. If you are limited in what you can do as far as, let's say, lobbying, that's one thing that as a nonprofit, particularly a 501c3, you cannot do. If you have a different type of a designation, like a 501h, you can go out and you can lobby, if you will. Those are other reasons why a nonprofit can lose their C3 status. So I don't know if we have time for one more question or not. I think our time is coming to a close, but Paula and Tim, do we have time for another question if there is one?
Yeah, obviously, Sharon, if you're willing to sit in and answer a question or more, anyone else, feel free to leave if you need to. but we definitely have time.
Okay.
And also, we can send out her email if anybody has any, questions that, it's right there on the screen. If
Yes.
anybody has any questions that they think about later on. So thank you so much, Sharon. This was very informative.
Well, thank you again for the opportunity, and thank you all so much for the work that you do. I am more than happy to answer any questions now or after. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me if I can be of help too. But it has been really one of my absolute joys in life to, have worked in nonprofit field and to really study and learn more about the importance of our boards and also the jobs that every one of you do. So thank you all so very much.
We'll
If
hang
no one
out
else
for a
has-
minute just
If
to
no one
see
else
you.
has one, I'll throw out another. You mentioned getting the financials audited, which is rather costly. So if you're a smaller organization like ours, that money is better spent on the people we're trying to serve than trying to pull off one of those audits. How did you manage that as you were getting started? When did you first have an audited financials to report?
Well, because we began our organization with state funding, we were obligated to have an independent external audit. And obviously the audits, the cost of an audit is typically correlated to the amount of funding that you have. And so, we would go out for bid and, we would, you don't want to change your accountants every single year. They really need to build some history with you. So we would ask for, a bid for, let's say, a 3-year period, and we would compare those bids and then select the firm that, we thought had the greatest benefit for our organization with the most affordable cost for us. But the other thing is to know that if you are not required by a funder to have an external independent audit, you can also have what's called a financial review. So for a couple of organizations that I'm involved with, our revenue in those organizations is not extensive. For the most part, it's under, $150,000 a year. They are not required. They do not have a government contract, so they're not required for a formal audit. So we ask for a financial review. And I will tell you that the financial review that is done essentially is very similar to the full audit, but they don't go through all the levels of detail, and that costs significantly less. So, with our organization, with about $2.5 million, we're paying about $12,000 a year for our audit. It's a lot of money. There are other organizations, other accounting firms that would charge more. I don't know if we'd find something with much less, but we had long-term relationships here. There are 2 organizations that I'm involved with that have those resources that are maybe, 150,000 or under. The financial review that is done, and this is done locally, costs around $800. Very, very different in cost-wise, but it gives you the same thing so that when you are applying for funding, and let's say particularly through, our local foundations or whatever, to show them that you've had that review done by, again, an external firm, but it's a financial review, gives them, I think, the same sense of comfort, that your finances are in order. I know, Paula, you look at a lot of these when it comes to people who are applying for grants there. Do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I think exactly what you said was what I would have said, that going with the financial review rather than, the other. We have a lot of organizations that actually come in with financial reviews rather than audits. Our audit is extremely high. But, it's like you said, I have a question around that, which is strange that I probably should know this myself. If someone does a 501c3, no matter what their size, have to have some form of financial review or financial audit, is that a requirement?
I don't think so.
Right?
Not to my knowledge. If they are, let's say, receiving, it's good business. It's good fiscal sense to have some sort of an external review. And it is really a protective factor for the organization. But, many foundations would not necessarily require an audit. They may not ask for a financial, an external financial review. But it really is, I think, a very important task to have, especially when you are, I'm going to say small, and small doesn't necessarily mean that, so from, our beginning at $125,000 state grant that required an external audit to over $2 million that requires an external audit. There's a huge range there, but as an organization, we don't have a full-blown financial department. We have a person, we have a financial manager, and then there's a part of the responsibility of the executive director and the office manager who share in some of those check and balance functions. So, even though, you might be larger in a resource wise, your financial staff does not grow. And that's one of the reasons why it'd be very important to have some sort of an external review by someone who can look at it from a more objective perspective.
And I think that board is also more comfortable too, because they now have an outside, your auditor coming and doing a presentation saying, you guys are doing the things okay. Because we only have a financial review. We don't have an audit. And I don't think until you hit $1 million, you have to have an audit anymore. So I think a lot of nonprofits are going with financial reviews instead, because it's half, for us at least, it's half the cost. I know when I quoted it.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Now, when you say that was part of your, was it part of your state contract, or was it the threshold? I know there's a threshold now. I'll probably get it wrong. I think it's like $250,000, and
it was 250,000 last I checked.
A certain amount of net assets
for an audit.
Yeah.
And
so
Bryce,
was
that's
that
what you're
triggered
saying as
by
well?
the specific stipulations of your contract, or was that just what it was at the time in terms of the threshold for having an audit?
For our purposes, it was a required part of the state contract.
Okay.
That we had to have it. And Bryce, you're saying there is a baseline. I think Jesse just mentioned $1 million, and you said 250,000.
$1 million
yeah.
for the audit. $1 million's for the audit.
I thought it was 250,000.
No, I just spoke to my auditor like yesterday.
Wow, they raised it. Awesome.
Yeah, okay. it just bumped to $1 million. It had been at 750.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think it was also an and statement. You had to have something and something, like a certain financial threshold, and I think a certain number of amount of assets for that to trigger. I know we're not triggering it, so.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Anybody else have anything?
I have a board question. I have a board question that maybe Sharon would know the answer to. So if a board member has issues in their life that are short-term issues in their life, so they're not going to be able to show up for X number of board members, is a board leave really a real thing? And if they go on leave, are your quorum numbers still the same, or should they really be going off and then coming back on when they're able to come back on? Because from my perspective, you're reducing their liability. I think if they're on leave, they still have a liability as a board member. And then you would still have a quorum, you could face a quorum issue.
Jesse, you really need to look at your bylaws for that. This can absolutely be addressed in bylaws. I've seen lots of bylaws where a leave of absence is allowable, and it is a formal acceptance, request and acceptance by the board, which then would ensure that when you are trying to make sure of quorum at a meeting, that person on leave is not count towards quorum, or your total quorum doesn't count, including that individual.
We're doing bylaws review right now. So.
There you go. Always fun.
Yes.
I have a question that's not specific to board, but our board has been discussing it. So we are currently accredited, and we're accredited through Solighton Institute, which is a national accrediting institute. However, I feel like I was looking into alternatives for accreditation agencies, because we're a private non-for-profit. But I'm also noticing that through like HR components of like Paychecks Inc. and things like that, you can also have your HR and policies and all of that reviewed. How important do you feel it is to have accreditation at this point as a private non-for-profit?
So I'm not sure that I've ever heard of a nonprofit that has to be accredited, unless you're in a specific field. So, Jill, you're with the Samaritan, right?
Yeah, and I don't know that we have to, but I've been trying to research because it's a large cost for us. And so I was thinking about sort of dropping that accreditation. And they do an audit every 2 to 3 years of our policies and procedures and whatnot. But that's also like, there's other ways to have that audit done. And there's other ways to review those policies. So I really would like to sort of save us that money and drop that Soliton accreditation. So I just wanted to see if there were other agencies that also are not accredited and how important they felt that might be.
We're not accredited. I've only heard, I guess I've only heard of accreditation, the kind of the way Sharon responded to it, which is if you're in a certain field that requires accreditation.
Okay.
Right.
Good to know. Good to know.
Yeah. So my guess is your accreditation is coming through something like a social work accreditation, or, you know, mental health or psychological accreditations. Not
Right.
necessarily
And
accreditation.
originally,
Yeah.
yeah, and originally we were more of a pastoral agency, but this is our 40th year anniversary. And for the last 10 years, we have not been religiously affiliated, but we do have a spiritual approach. So I think Soliton leaned in that pastoral aspect, and there is CARF and there are, you know, other agencies that will do accreditation, but it's extremely expensive. It's like $17,000 for the audit.
Wow.
We don't see us really needing to have our policies audited every 2 years. We aren't making the changes that would need to have.
I'll just say, I worked at a very large mental health organization in Ithaca, and we weren't accredited.
Right. And if you're under OMH or OASIS, you wouldn't be, because that would be that, you know, they would be reviewing that. But good, if not, then I think I would like to drop it, but I just wasn't sure if, you know, if other agencies were or were not. So this is helpful.
I would strongly suggest you discuss that with your board.
Yeah, and we have been
also take
discussing
an action
it.
on
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I'll weigh in and say, in my 10 years as a SCORE mentor, I never, working with nonprofits, I never heard of anything like that.
An accreditation. Yeah. I'm sure that it's specific to the type of service practice.
Yeah, I mean, we have, we go through our accreditation for our 211, but it's not a requirement. It just shows that we meet all of these expectations to be an accredited 211. So it's a little different, but.
Yeah, and the only time I've ever had it come up is with grant writing. Sometimes it'll be a question, but it doesn't mean that you can't apply or get the grant if you're not accredited. I just think you have the option to list accreditations.
Yeah.
So far I haven't run into, and I've looked through NICEAD, I've looked through SAMHSA, like I've done some research where it doesn't seem like there's a necessity for it. So it would be nice to sort of renegotiate that cost in our upcoming budget. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Yes.
All right.
Anything
everyone.
else?
Sharon,
Well,
again,
thank you all so much.
This was great. Thanks. Everybody have a great rest of your day.
My pleasure. Thank you all.
Come
Thank
join
you.
us
Bye-bye.
tonight at the networking reception.
Good to see you again, Sharon.
I'm sorry, Stephen.
I said, good to see you again. Nice to see you.
Oh, it's great to see you always. Thanks.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.